Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Striking a Balance Between Compliance and Productivity. All lines will be placed on mute to prevent any background noise. Thank you. We have Jack Rasmussen and Tom Miller. You can begin your webinar.
Thank you, Darche. And thanks to everyone for joining us this afternoon for today's webinar that will focus on striking a balance between compliance and productivity. My name is Tom Miller, and I'm a Vice President of Solutions here at Noble Systems. Today's webinar is part of Noble Systems' Compliance Webinar Series, designed to both help our customers better understand what is a complex and often challenging regulatory world, as well as define strategies for you to improve performance and productivity. Today I'm joined by Jack Rasmussen, Regional Sales Manager for Noble Systems. And Jack brings a wealth of experience working with customers to apply both analytics and technology to enhance the productivity of contact centers and inside sales organizations. Yeah, I'd like to maybe start off with just a State of the Union as it relates to our external regulatory environment. Every day it seems as an industry, we face a new layer of regulation at the federal, state, and local levels. Regardless of what industry you work in, whether it's financial services or telecommunications, retail, or healthcare, and really regardless of the function for which you're proactively reaching out to your customers and your prospects, whether that's to collect a delinquent debt, fundraising, selling products or services, or simply proactively servicing a customer base, literally every business faces rapidly expanding regulatory pressure. And these regulations somehow and in some way are restricting your ability to operate, to make efficient and effective contact with your customers, to call or text or email, whatever's necessary to really reach out and contact and achieve your business objectives. And every company needs to be dead serious and dead focused on being compliant within all of these regulatory requirements. Because you don't want your company, your brand, to be the next problem you read about in the press, or the media has decided to splash across the news or the headlines. You don't want your team, your sales or your collections department, to be the cause of some multi-million-dollar class action settlement. And obviously we've read about and seen quite a bit of that lately. So it's really important that as an industry, we all make compliance a top priority. Now I'll take a minute just to highlight the July declaration, the clarification by the FCC regarding TCPA, because this is a sort of a meaningful, important action that occurred just recently. And this TCPA ruling is applicable to any company that's either intentionally or even potentially calling someone on their mobile phone. Again, for virtually any purpose. And this specifically applies to calling into mobile phones where you do not have express consent to call that device. While there were a number of points to this ruling, one of the most important and potentially challenging was the clarification of the definition of an automated dialer, which captures not only present capacity to dial, but also theoretical potential to store or produce telephone numbers to be called using random or sequential number generator and to dial those numbers. And so this theoretical potential essentially captures any device that could be configured to automatically dial. Or if you think about it, really simply any device or system that can use software and that software can be recoded. Other clarifications in this TCPA release included your required ability to not only capture and manage express consent, but also that the consumer can revoke that consent at any time. It defined that text messages are also captured under TCPA, just like voice calls. So yes, text is now captured under the TCPA ruling. And that each company essentially has one free pass, you know, kind of a mulligan when it comes to calling into a reassigned number. So one call to that number and then an inability to make that mistake again without potentially subjecting yourself to fine. And each of these clarifications bring their own challenges, but across the board, they're really creating productivity challenges for everybody's proactive contact business. And then, of course, there's internal compliance. So in addition to all the external regulation that exists, most companies today and most of the customers that we work with are then applying their own set of rules to ensure that their brand is protected in today's viral social media culture. That every executive office and every executive boardroom is placing a priority on reputational risk and how to manage those risks. That the customer experience is a priority in an economy that seems increasingly competitive in almost every single industry out there. And where every business today, certainly every business that I talk to and within our customer group, I mean, everybody's fighting to not only acquire, but also retain profitable customer relationships. And let's face it, there is no other department or function in any company that has more interactions, more daily interactions with the customer than the contact center. It is the front line of customer communication, and whether you're selling or collecting or raising funds, it's imperative that you have policies, technology, strategies that really can help you to deliver that positive customer experience. So that brings us to today's balancing act, striking the balance between compliance and productivity. Because while it's essential that you're operating in a compliant manner all the time, your business goals aren't changing. They haven't changed. They're certainly not getting any easier. You still need to hit sales quota. You still need to achieve your fundraising goal. You still need to hit your collection number. Whatever that is, those business objectives remain intact today. And unfortunately, there's nothing about regulatory compliance that's designed to improve your productivity. Probably rightfully so. Regulation is basically about protecting consumers and protecting individuals, not about helping your business to be more productive and more effective in what you do. But leading companies are finding ways to strike this balance. We see it every day. We see it within our customers. They're executing strategies, they're making investments that enable them to not only operate within compliance, but find ways to recapture some of that lost productivity and find ways to improve the customer experience along the way. And so with that, now let me turn it over to Jack to share some practical examples of how that's happening within our customer base. Jack?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Tom. Really appreciate that, and I'm very happy to be participating in this webinar today. As we at Noble have talked with thousands of companies and call center executives, we're often learning that a lot of the approaches are relatively simplistic or basic, or they're just protecting what they know. And so a lot of executives are putting on location-based campaigns, namely calling certain states or cities once per day or week at set times just to ensure that call frequency limits are observed. Or some might venture further by setting a maximum number of calls per day or minimum interval between calls, regardless of where the customer lives. And we found that some run dedicated cell phone campaigns in preview mode just to ensure that an agent is available for each call. But of course, under the new regulations, this reduces dialer efficiency and effectiveness. And to the extreme, some have even gone as far as calling all cell phones manually, or even scrubbing cell phone numbers from the list and not calling them at all. And that, of course, is the opposite of what could be done with analytics. So as a company, we are trying to share what some best practices are for these best-in-class contact centers to use advanced analytics and to be smarter and actually bring in a lot more money for the company. So here's just a general picture, and as I go through the following slides, you can kind of reflect or think back to this one. On the left-hand side is a company's typical dialer scenario. So the agent dialer would be, this is for outbound now, that would be pictured at the bottom, and then most companies would have other channels that they could communicate with, such as blaster voice or text, SMS, or emails. And then at the end of the day, the contact information for all the attempts would be sent up to the host system, and then the load would be designed the next day for what account should be contacted, whether it's for collections purposes or for marketing purposes or other. And so on the right-hand side are some tools that might be extremely valuable in the solution. Vincio is a platform where various, like scorecards or champion and challenger strategy, logic could be put in there. That's an area where companies would use to design what accounts should even be called the next day. So once your company creates these lists, then it would be sent, in our example here, down to, for example, Calltech or OnCue. Calltech is a system that computes the, just to use a nickname, the best time to call for all of the accounts for each hour during the day across all the time zones. And then Calltech would send that information to OnCue. OnCue would talk back and forth either to the dialer or it could send accounts to any of those other channels as appropriate. So let me show you some of the things that are behind the scenes. There are some companies that offer, this best time to call feature, but a lot of times they would just be using pooled data scorecards. Those are typically pretty weak, and in fact, the data that you as a company might contribute to the pool rarely helps you. It mostly helps your competitors. And also, you don't know if the data that other people had contributed was TCPA compliant when it was made. And another big harm is that data is typically from the wrong season from when you want to call. In other words, data might have been contributed in the spring or the summer, and now you're trying to make calls in the fall and the winter. And who knows if those patterns really fit what you would like to do. So instead, one tool that we suggest is Calltech. Calltech has at least 200 different custom scorecards inside of it, because we try to build one scorecard for every hour of the day, for every day of the week. It's built solely with your own data, which of course would be compliant if we are able to work with you on that. There's separate scorecards, in fact, for landline phone numbers, and a different family of 200 scorecards if you're calling wireless numbers, for which you have the opt-in permission. We've tested, a lot of our clients have tested the Calltech scorecards versus pooled scorecards versus other logic, and the Calltech ones are significantly more powerful. Tom was in charge of a research study that we did with millions of mobile phone numbers versus landline phone numbers, and we discovered by hour of the day that the response rate, the RPC connect rate, was much higher for when we were calling the mobile phone numbers. And in fact, a lot of people today, that's all that they have. My 3 children only have a wireless phone that they carry around with them. Some of the challenges, of course, is what's the area code of that phone number, and so that's why we are very careful as we create these different models for these different scenarios. Now, switching over to some ways that a product called OnCue can help with balancing compliance and not harming the productivity. In this use case, we had a client, we have several of them that have multiple business units, and the units each have their own CRM, and they were not able to connect the call attempt data across all of those different CRMs. And so they were discovering that they were calling one person many times during the day when another department had already called them. Another different client we had, customers would receive a collection reminder from one division, and then a different division would be calling them with an upsell offer like a refi or a credit line increase. So that, of course, violated the SLAs that the company wanted to follow, got a lot of complaints by the customers. And so the company put in new policies requiring caps on the total number of enterprise calls. So Calltech is pretty interesting because it can it can gather data from all of these separate CRMs and blend them much easier than even a large bank or any other kind of a company could. A second benefit, one company told us that the attrition of good customers who were leaving because of all these nuisance calls, that got reduced by 4% just by not calling these customers as often. We also have several large customers where they have multiple dialers. One client, for example, had 4 dialers from 3 different dialer brands, and they also shipped some calls overseas to a BPO for overflow and high delinquency. But now they are able to manage all of those 4 different command centers from one command center. So not only could they incorporate better TCPA control, but also they reduced 4 different call center administrators from having different interpretations of the internal call guidelines, and they saved money. They reduced their dialer administration staff from 20 down to 4. Now, what about customers who seem to be in several time zones at the same time? And of course, they're only in one place, but because of the zip code, because of the area codes, perhaps of their landline might be a different area code from their cell phone from when they moved. Well, this number portability is causing constraints. Some companies just revert to not calling on the outside edge of either of those 2 area codes just to make sure that they don't call before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. Well, Calltech can analyze the relationships of all of these various types of codes and determine when it is actually safe to call, even though when it might not appear to be. And so Calltech can study for each device what the legal calling hours, and then, of course, OnCue can help to be the quarterback and decide when a call might not be best, and instead send the information to a chat or an SMS. Now, we can also overcome the constraint of the call limits by device. So Vincio can calculate the decay of contact likelihood by device. So we know of some companies that attempt to call a delinquent customer up to 8 times in a day, but unfortunately that just trains the person to not answer at all. So Vincio can use custom scorecards to determine which persons should only be attempted 1 time, or 2, or 3, or 4 times in a day, or maybe bypass it for that day because they have a high likelihood of paying anyway. So we don't want anyone to risk a violation of the TCPA or the CFPB, especially when your phone number for each attempt is recorded on a person's home phone system, and they could identify, even if you don't leave a message, they can identify that they were called. So Calltech can incorporate penetration limits into the schedules that it optimizes. It can also set caps on the number of attempts to each phone or to each email address and so on. And furthermore, it can calculate the weighted value of a contact per device. And by the way, the weighted value and the likelihood of an answer is different for each device. So that's why it's important to know that. A lot of companies are asking us about recall handling and reclassification. So on the recall area, Calltech can provide an optimized call schedule for any of, if you just want to have 1 pass through the entire downloaded list per day, or would you like to have multiple passes per day, a penetration of 300, 400%, or if you just wanted to have 1 pass over several days, like if you're doing marketing or biz dev calls. So our finance companies and our college enrollment clients, we're creating hundreds of campaigns for tiny groups, groups that might have different rules or regulations for the geography that they are in. Also, this turned out that the campaigns were being sent to agents that had the wrong skill level. Many of the people weren't called back on a recall at all. So the clients told us that they wanted to combine many local regulation variations into single campaigns, including that recall logic. And so Caltech can easily compute that RPC probability into these hourly lists of the calls and the post-call decisioning, and then OnCue combine the multiple segments into single queues. There's another really important part that I'm sure a lot of you are already following, which is a quick succession contact by channel, which means that when you conclude that either the one-time attempt or even a multiple attempts, once you exceed some kind of a limit that you have put into the system, then you want to do a follow-up with an alternate method, such as a voice message or an email or an SMS. And this, again, is really easy to set up inside OnCue. Dynamic reclassification, when there is a list of accounts that are to be contacted during the day, sometime during the day, but midday an event causes that record to change the status, like a payment comes in or an inbound call with a promise or an inquiry or maybe an order, you don't need to make that phone call with that initial message that you were planning. So OnCue can immediately have a file sent to it to reclassify the account. And so instead of launching that sales call or collection call, now you can shift to a not agent or some other message that you might want to convey. So as we conclude here, we want to recognize that the agent costs in a company are really the largest expense for most contact centers. And profitability depends on keeping those agents communicating with customers. But unfortunately, many companies are either forging ahead without planning for these regulations or are unnecessarily hampering their effectiveness by sticking to old-fashioned and simplistic strategies. The potential damage from failure to comply with restrictions on proactive contact campaigns continues to grow as the sources and types of laws and regulations multiply, like Tom was mentioning. And also, businesses are struggling to incorporate the latest technology into their policies and plans. And they might have a lot of different vendor software that they are trying to integrate at the same time. And all of that is complex and takes a lot of time. So in this environment, the strategy management applications must provide granular control over each contact attempt to each device on each record in a campaign, and also should allow the business users to quickly incorporate each new rule as opposed to sending something off to IT and other ways that takes a long time before risking the reputation on the next contact attempt. So Tom, that was just a quick run-through through several ways that I think some of these interesting tools are pretty advanced and can help in increasing the effectiveness in this restrictive world that we're in.
No, that's great, Jack. So I think we've got some questions that have come in to us. I think we've got some time now. So why don't we switch gears to that, and maybe I'll turn it back to you to start that and address a few of the questions on your end.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, there are two that I noticed that came in that are related to some of the tools we were just talking about. One was related to Caltech. So if Caltech sequences the accounts by their best time, and some accounts never make it high enough to be called, what happens to those accounts? And that's a great question, because you don't want accounts to be just sloughed over for weeks at a time and never get called at all. So, and of course, these would be accounts where the person answering the phone would be extremely low. And so inside Caltech, you can create a special list for any of these orphaned accounts that haven't been called by the dialer after X number of days. And then you would simply add logic to OnCue to force the accounts in that list to be called. So that will ensure that at least you tried them. You still might not have success reaching them, but at least they will be tried and not forgotten. Okay, and then a second question I had here that someone submitted was how to handle the multiple channels that are in the Noble platform, the multiple contact channels. So if you can think back to that chart that had the 3 green boxes, that's where OnCue can send records directly to a blaster or other non-agent channels. And so that can be done either for the initial contact that day, or it can be done as part of the recall logic. So that is how OnCue can work with the different channels that are available in the Noble platform. Now, in addition, in that first top green box called Vinceo, you could also have other scorecards that would predict the decay or the declining effectiveness of making multiple calls to the same person on the same day. In Invencio, you can also weight the cost of each type of contact against the expected return of reaching the contact. And so that will guide you to help specify what type of contact you want to make and in what sequence using Invencio. So Tom, those are the two that seem to be most important here.
Okay. Yeah, we had another, I've got a few more. So we had another one here that was asking about how Calltech in particular helps with compliance and some of the innovative ways it's being used. So I think one thing that we're seeing a lot from the customer base is the ability to take advantage of the prior call history database. So this probably hits both from, or maybe leans a little bit more toward internal compliance and customer experience. But because Calltech is storing typically 4 to 6 months worth of prior call history, that information can be used to set multi-day call limitations. So what's a reasonable number of calls over a week or 2 weeks? Again, sort of going above and beyond what the regulatory requirements would demand. I think that again is becoming a more popular use than simply taking advantage of the database for analytics and contactability scoring. Another question here, are third-party compliance firms recommended over self-compliance in most cases? You know, I think it's unclear on the external versus internal in that example, but I think what we found with all of our customers is that a lot of them feel that they need to make a strong effort to comply. I think that's a common theme. So, you know, there is obviously uncertainty around an interpretation as it relates to any of the regulatory laws and requirements. It certainly varies based on each company's legal and compliance threshold and comfort level. But I think what we see is that, you know, this belief that if they're making investments and they're setting policy in a way that's designed to be compliant, that will in fact demonstrate a strong intent. And so even if they may be a little bit off in the interpretation, the fact that they're investing and really driving toward higher level of compliance, you know, they think that just puts them in a better situation. So that's our material for today. I think that hits most of the key questions that came in, and hopefully we covered the other through parts of the presentation today. Again, I want to thank everybody for taking some time with us this afternoon. Very much appreciated. And with that, we'll conclude today's webinar. Thank you again, and thanks again for taking the time today.